As said before, you've probably heard a lot about finance terms being thrown around. One of the most common things you've been hearing is the term Ponzi scheme. In this podcast, I'm going to explain how it works. Now, what is a Ponzi scheme? Well, it's an investment arrangement in which investors are promised low risk and high return. Here's the catch. These investments are fraudulent. They are not actual investments. They eventually collapse, and investors lose a lot of money. The origin of the term Ponzi scheme comes from Italian immigrant Charles Ponzi, who immigrated to the United States in the 1880s. He was a businessman who later duped a lot of people into buying postal reply coupons. When the scheme collapsed, Ponzi had carried out one of the largest frauds in U.S. history. So how does a Ponzi scheme work? Well, let's start with an example. Let's take an investment of 6 blocks, and each block is worth $1, so in total that's an investment valued at $6. Anyway, the client goes to what he thinks is a qualified investor. In reality, this investor is a Ponzi schemer, and he says, I have $6. The investor says, if you give me your $6 and invest with me, I will give you $9 of return. So the naive client gives his $6 to the investor. When the client is ready for his money, the investor gives it back to him with the full $9 or the $3 of return that he promised. Satisfied client Green goes and tells his friends Orange, Red, and Blue about his wonderful investment experience. In turn, Orange, Red, and Blue give their investments to the Ponzi schemer. Sure enough, when Orange, Red, and Blue ask for their money back, Ponzi schemer is able to produce it with the high returns that he's promised. The problem with Ponzi schemes is despite the great return, it's looking behind the returns that actually matter. The truth about them, and this is the secret about Ponzi schemes, is they're not about investing. Rather, it's a distribution or a redistribution of money from new investors to old investors. And in this example, let's say there's an old investor, Investor Pink, and he had given Ponzi schemer $6. So he goes to Ponzi schemer and says, I want my return. What Ponzi schemer has actually done is that he's taken money from the newer investors, Red, Orange, and Blue, and he's used that money as part of the return. Now, in fact, this is a simplified example of how a Ponzi scheme works. In reality, it's much more complicated, and there's a lot more money being used. The key to understand is not that this example is simple, but that this reflects that the money is being shifted from newer investors to older investors. Thus, the cycle continues. Because satisfied clients are thrilled with their return, the Ponzi schemer earns a good reputation, and that's how Ponzi schemes are able to sustain themselves, by taking money from the much larger pool of newer investors and giving it to the smaller pool of old investors. The pattern continues until the Ponzi schemer stops getting newer investors, or these newer investors aren't large enough to sustain the demands of the older investors. This often happens during an economic downturn or if something goes awry in the fund. The result, when all is exposed, is that the entire scheme collapses. Thus explains the story of Bernie Madoff. The feds estimated that Madoff must have swindled about $50 billion worth of money. How did he get so many clients? Well, it was primarily reputation-based. He started giving out some good return that his clients referred him to their friends, and slowly he was able to build up a roster of very wealthy clients. By having this large number of clients, Madoff was able to sustain his fund for a good period of time, until finally some people started getting suspicious and the entire scheme collapsed. That's the reality behind Ponzi schemes. They can never last. To review, Ponzi schemes aren't actually investments. They're just a redistribution of money from old investors to new investors. When new investors can't support the returns of old investors, the scheme collapses. Investors such as Bernie Madoff are able to get a wide array of clients because of their reputation, not because of their investing ability. Thus, they are able to fool many people. Coming up, how assets can be toxic. Thanks for watching. To learn more or watch more podcasts, visit www.subprimethemusical.wordpress.com.